Greetings, fellow book lovers, and welcome back to Colin's Corner. Today, we will be going over 10 books that have been on my physical TBR for over a year, but before we get into today's list, we have to go over the answer for the last Comedy with Colin segment, where I asked you guys to joke, why did the picture go to jail? The answer? Because it was framed. Alright, with that out of the way, let's move on with today's list. So these 10 books are books that I have physically owned for over a year, have purchased because I really wanted to read them, but for some reason or another they keep getting pushed back and pushed back. So I figured I would make a list. I would look at my bookshelf, make a list of the 10 books that I've owned for over a year that really are just drawing my attention and my interest the most. Now, let's begin with book number 1, which is going to be The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, which would be the beginning of my Abercrombie journey and my entrance into his first law world that he created. Now, so many people that I have watched over the last 4 years or so that I've been watching BookTube have spoken so highly about this world that Abercrombie has created, and specifically about his character work. Now, I'm not one of those people that says, I'm primarily a character reader, I'm primarily a plot-driven reader, I'm primarily a this, that, or the other. I like to experience many different methods and styles that are done well. And one thing that I consistently hear about Joe Abercrombie's work is that his character work is top-notch, and he has this ability to create voices and character tones and voices that are so unique that you don't even need a dialogue tag to know who is speaking. And that sounds really exciting to me, to have these hyper-realistic feeling characters. And I know that the world that he has created is pretty dark and grim, and many of the characters that people know and love are actually not the greatest people. However, a talented author like Joe Abercrombie seems to have gripped thousands and thousands of people with his talent for creating these characters. I don't really know much, obviously these are books that I haven't read yet. I don't really know much about the First Law world, other than, just that the magic in this world seems to be fading, and the people in this world seem to be losing belief in magic. So that's kind of a cool premise right off the rip for me. But I cannot wait to eventually meet some of these characters that I've heard people talk about so much, such as Glockta, Logan Ninefingers, and Giselle. So, regardless, I'm very excited to dip into Joe Abercrombie's world finally. I don't have an exact plan of when I will start, but I'm going to start to try to prioritize at least the first trilogy in the First Law world. For book number 2, we're going to go with Malice by John Gwynne, also known as the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. So these covers, look at that. These covers just scream epic fantasy to me. Make me think that there's just going to be tons of sweet, epic battle scenes that are going on throughout this book and hopefully this series. And that's really exciting. And from what I've gathered, the premise of The Faithful and the Fallen is that there is a war looming between gods that will essentially determine the fate of the world, what direction the world goes in. So that sounds awesome, and the scope is massive. I have heard from a lot of people that love the series that there, in the beginning especially, are a lot of characters to get to know. Currently I'm reading Malazan, and there are a lot of characters in Malazan to get to know, so maybe this is, I don't know if that's a step up from The Faithful and the Fallen. I'm not really sure how the characters are kind of introduced to us yet in Malice, but I'm not too daunted by that. I think, enough people that I really align with in terms of my views and my enjoyments have loved The Faithful and the Fallen series and John Gwynne's other books that I think that this will be something that's right up my alley. I do know that from my research online and just listening to people talk about this series, there tend to be some more classic fantasy tropes in this series, which I'm totally okay with. And there are also animal companions, which is a very, very quick way to my heart, as well as many other people's hearts. So I'm really interested to see John Gwynne's take on his character work, and especially his animal companions. And I've heard so many great things about the battles in his books that I'm just really pumped to eventually get to Malice. The next book on this list, ironically, I do not have physically at the moment because I just lent it to a buddy, but that would be Dune by Frank Herbert. Now, the buddy of mine that just finished Dune said that it was unexpected, but it was unexpected in a great way, and that makes me really excited to finally dive into this world that Frank Herbert has created and meet Paul, our main character. Now, obviously, like I've said, and will probably say again, these are all books that I haven't read yet, but Dune is such a popular book and a pillar of the science fiction community and pop culture that, I kind of have a general idea of the general premise. And there is a spice called Merange that can only be found on the planet Arrakis. And so essentially all of the planets in the universe are trying to vie for control of this spice because it is the most powerful substance in the universe. Therefore, in my mind, I'm thinking, so if you control spice or the Merange, then you essentially have control over the universe, which sounds like the stakes are extremely high, and the idea of interplanetary warfare just sounds out of this world to me. Sorry. I had to make a joke there. My wife and daughter, God love them, hear these kind of jokes from me every single day, and I will never stop. So actually, I don't apologize. But anyways, I can't wait to finally get to Dune. I've been putting it off for too long. It's such a pillar, like I said, of the science fiction community and the sci-fantasy community. It is just something that I feel like I cannot keep putting off. Next up, for book number 4, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Now, this is a book that I've admittedly been putting off kind of on purpose, simply because I want to make sure I'm in the right state of mind to read a book like this. I know that it can be very bleak, and a lot of McCarthy's writing can be very bleak, although thought-provoking. And so I don't want to... I've been putting this off because I don't want to ruin my experience with this book by trying to force it on myself during a time where I might not be in the right headspace to read a book of that nature. Now, I've heard from just so many people that I love and respect in the BookTube community that reading Cormac McCarthy in general, not just The Road, is just such a unique experience. And, it's widely known now that he doesn't really follow the rules of syntax and grammar and kind of just does his own thing. And it's a very unique writing style that I know rubs some people the wrong way, but I feel like it's something that I definitely want to try sometime soon. And I believe it was Jimmy from the Fantasy Network with Joanna from Joanna Reads who read The Road together, and they did something that I kind of want to try to implement whenever I get to The Road finally, but they took it really slowly. Like, they read it over the course of maybe a whole month and kind of just let each chapter that they read sit with them. I'm not sure if they did chapter by chapter or a certain amount of pages or whatever, but I think when I finally get to The Road, I want to spread it out, maybe over the course of a month. Just read a little bit a day and just kind of let this book sit with me and marinate. For those of you that may not know, The Road is a book about a father and a son traveling across a post-apocalyptic America after a crisis event. So the world is very bleak in general. It's almost the end of humanity, except for a straggling few. And The Road was a massive inspiration for many post-apocalyptic media that we know and love today, such as The Last of Us, which is one of my favorite video games of all time. Next up, for book number 5, we have Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which I have in this kind of bind-up that has a few different books. I think Leaving Cheyenne and the Last Picture Show. So I found this a while back at a estate sale, I believe, and I picked it up for like $1 or $2. So the amount of people on BookTube recently that have Lonesome Dove at the top of their all-time favorite list or very close to the top of their all-time favorite list is staggering. And it seems like I said recently, more and more people are reading this every single month. People that I've been following or, fresh faces from 2023 are picking this book up, and it is skyrocketing up their favorites of all time list. So that alone is really exciting. I know a lot of people hold this book very near and dear to their heart, and the plot seems fairly simplistic. I don't know if this is exactly what it's about, but the general premise that I have gathered is that we are following a group of Texas Rangers as they move from Texas to Montana, and this takes place in the late 19th century. So this is a Western, which is a genre that I don't think I've read anything or hardly watched anything in. Unless you want to count The Gunslinger, which I think some people would, some people wouldn't. But that would probably be the only thing that's even comparable to a Western that I have read. So the idea of trying out a book in an entirely new and fresh genre to me is extremely exciting. And the amount of people that just love this book has really, really pushed it farther up my TBR than it was even 3 or 4 months ago. Next up for book number 6, we have In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Now, this book here is a little bit out of the ordinary of what I have been covering on the channel so far, as it is a non-fiction book. This book was written in 1966 and covers the murders of 4 members of the Clutter family. From my poking around online, In Cold Blood, one of the biggest themes that's explored is evil, the nature of evil. What is and isn't considered evil? How does the concept of evil change and have different meanings within different individuals? And that seems like a really interesting theme to study, especially in the context of this being a non-fiction book. I'm wondering if it will hit a little bit more close to home because of its non-fiction nature and my knowing that this was a true story that actually happened and it wasn't something that somebody just made up. And for some reason, when the nature of evil is explored with the supernatural element removed, where it's really just humanity being evil, that's the kind of stuff that nowadays tends to just scare me, really scare me even more. Although I do love reading horror and supernatural, alien, whatever, ghost, spirit, stuff like that. I love reading and watching stuff like that, but the real life stuff is typically the stuff that really kind of gets under my skin nowadays. I've been really interested to read this for a long time. The main reason I've been putting this one off, because I've owned this one for 2 or 3 years now, is that it has been my Patreon pick for Jimmy on the Fantasy Network's Patreon wheel for a long time, and I really would like to kind of read it alongside him if I ever get picked, but there's kind of just been an itch that I want to scratch recently, and this might be that scratch for me. So I'm going to hold on for a little bit longer. Hopefully I get picked within the next few months on Jimmy's Patreon, but if not, I might just pick this up because it's not very long and I've wanted to read it for a very long time. Next up for book number 7, we have Leviathan Wigs. This is by James S.A. Corey, which is a pen name for 2 authors who wrote the series, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. Now, this is the first book in the Expanse series, which is a very long science fiction series, which I believe is totaling 9 novels. I think there are some other short stories or maybe novellas that are written in this universe as well, but it is a very long science fiction series. This is the only one that I've owned, and I've owned it for a while now, thinking that eventually I might want to pick it up and get into a long science fiction series. The setting is allegedly taking place 200 years or so after humankind has migrated to outer space, and events have apparently happened that have led to the potential of a civil war happening. I'm not exactly sure, and I've also not watched the show based on these books, so I'll be going into this one pretty blind, which I'm okay with. But one of the biggest things that's inspired me to get to this series a little bit sooner is my friend Ben from Books with Bengus Khan, who over the course of the last, half a year or so, has been speaking so highly of these books. I think he's done a lot of them on audio. He says the audio experience is tremendous, and I have not really read any hard sci-fi yet or any science fiction series, and I think that this might be one that I want to start with. So I'm very excited to eventually get to this. For book number 8, we have Sineline Ascends. This is going to be book 1 in the Books of Babel series by Josiah Bancroft. Our main character's name in this series is Sineline, and he goes on a honeymoon trip with his wife to the Tower of Babel. Sineline loses his wife and then concludes that she must have gotten lost within the Tower of Babel. So I believe that this series, especially this first book, is going to be essentially Senlin's journey into the Tower of Babel, where there are many different levels, and each level of the tower seems to be its own unique world with its own unique challenges that Senlin must overcome in order to find his wife. I've heard Alan from the Library of Alexandria give this series and Josiah Bancroft in general so much praise over the last couple of years. And I know that this series is one that is a bit divisive. Some people read it and really love it and really connect with it. Some people read it and don't seem to be able to see what the hype is about for it. I'm excited to give it a try. Hopefully I connect with either Senlin or Josiah Bancroft's writing or the world, or all of these would be awesome. And I do own all 4 books in this series, so I'm really hoping that it isn't a strikeout for me. For the 9th book on this list, we have Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. Yes, this is the same author that wrote The Perks of Being a Wallflower. However, this book is a bit of a different tone. This is Chbosky's take on horror. Now, in this book, we are following Kate and her son Christopher. Kate is fleeing an abusive relationship and decides to move to the small town of Mill Grove, Pennsylvania. Now, this begins one of the major appeals to this series for me, is that I live in western Pennsylvania. Allegedly, Mill Grove is northeastern Pennsylvania. So I've always been interested to see Chbosky's take on Pennsylvania to see if it feels realistic to me. But anyways, in this book, the premise begins when Christopher, the son, disappears. He goes into the woods and doesn't reappear for 6 days. When he gets back, he tells his mom that he's got a voice inside his head that is telling him that he has to build a treehouse in the woods by Christmas time, and if he fails, him, his mother, and everybody in the town of Mill Grove will be changed forever. So that is a pretty wild premise. I have no idea where a story like that could go. And I have to give some props to Jake from The Bookish Drummer, who has spoken so very highly about this book. And Jake is somebody that enjoys reading horror. He reads a lot of contemporary horror, which is something that I would like to become a little bit better with. And I align a lot of times with what Jake feels. So I've had this book. I found it at a Goodwill, I think 2 years ago now. And ever since I've heard Jake just sing the praises of this book, I've really wanted to try it. So I'm going to give it a try this October in my attempt to read books, horror books, other than Stephen King. Lastly, for book number 10, ironically, it is a Stephen King book, and that would be Different Seasons. Now, I could have put any number of King's books that I have been collecting over the last 3 or so years on this list, but Different Seasons has been kind of speaking out to me recently as something that I really want to get to. This one feels like I'm really missing out on it still. I have read some of King's greatest hits. There's still a lot that I need to get to, but I've never read any of the stories in Different Seasons, and admittedly, I have actually never seen any of the adaptations somehow either. I know, I'm a crappy King fan, but I'm going to try to remedy that. And since I haven't seen any of the adaptations for this yet, I might as well read the book first and then watch them with my wife later, because I do that a lot with Stephen King stuff. We just did that with The Outsider. So my buddy I was speaking with on Discord, Pat from Pat's Mythos, he recently read the Different Seasons collection and he absolutely loved it. I think he did a lot of it, or maybe all of it, on audio, which I might try to explore that route. But I do own the book physically, and I would like to just maybe try to fit some of these in when I can, because they are novellas, so it's not like one of King's crazy 800-page books. This seems like something that I can work in around some of the bigger reads that I have going on. The one that I think I'm the most excited to read about in this collection is The Body, because I really am just a sucker for a coming-of-age story. But with that being said, I am excited to read all of these. They all feel like they're going to have a very different tone to them. So that's really exciting, and it's just such a highly regarded collection of Stephen King's that I feel like I've really got to stop dragging my feet on this one. So that's going to do it for my list of books that have been on my physical TBR for way too long. Now, what I want is from you guys to put in the comments what you think I should read. what you think I would like. And I'm kind of leaning away from starting some of these series until I finish up some of the series that I'm currently on. But with that being said, if you think that one of these are going to be an absolute home run for me and you've read them, please let me know in the comments. Before we wrap up today's video, we of course have to do comedy with Colin, and today's joke is going to be, what do you call someone who never passes gas in public? If you think you know the answer, drop it down in the comments below. Guys, if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit the like button. And if you're enjoying the content that I'm releasing on the channel so far, please do consider subscribing, as that is the best way to support me. I hope you are all enjoying what you're currently reading, and remember, you're always welcome in Colin's Corner.